Hi, class. I'm going to go over a little bit. I'm going to presume that you're well into the reading on the various theories of leadership that was offered to you in our week one folder. Um, and of course, we lead off with the so-called great man theories and then transition into somewhat more sophisticated um, patterns of behavior, the so-called trait theories, which are interesting to me simply because they can more or less go all over the map. What I find interesting about trait theories is that they tend to be fairly culture bound, that the traits that are admired within one cultural context may be completely inappropriate in another. One need only look as far as, say, Japan and compare that to, say, Arab countries to see that the styles of leadership are completely disconnected from each other, by and large, not totally. Trait theories become fairly tricky because we do know that there are certain elements that are often connected or associated with leadership. For example, tall stature, being male, being well-spoken, a good orator has traditionally been helpful, perhaps less so now. Facially looking good, being neither too young nor too old. And there tends to be an ideal window that sometimes pops in. But all that said, it's clear that some of the great leadership, archetypes that we are associated with in history don't really fit those molds. Winston Churchill, while we often think of him as a great orator, in fact was kind of a stutterer, had a lisp, was a little bit hard to comprehend even with the British accent among the Britons. Napoleon, of course, had a very short stature, but was clearly a model of leadership, one that still resonates today. And the list goes on. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was crippled, so he led from a sitting position virtually all of his life. Had to literally be propped up, and yet was clearly a leader. So the idea of particular traits, trying to uncover, a kind of formula for this, I think will be misleading. What is fascinating to me actually is when you take apart some of these, again, historical models of leadership, there's this rather odd thing that comes to the fore, and that is that very often historical leaders come in from outside of the prevailing cultural context. There are numerous examples of this, some of them positive, some of them maybe considered dubious considering the outcomes, but they did assume a mantle of leadership and therefore are fair game for this. Think of, for example, the fact that Alexander the Great was not Greek. He was educated by Aristotle, but he was a Macedonian. He wasn't part of Greek culture. So there is that story of the Gordian knot. If you're not familiar with it, I suggest you get familiar with it. It was one of those kind of presaging episodes. It may not have been actually true, it may be apocryphal, but it proves the point that the legend had it that there was this massive tangle of cord that sat out in the front of a Greek temple. The location matters not. Alexander, again, as a young person, knew about the legend behind the Gordian knot, which was that whomever could untangle the knot was presumed to be then a conqueror of the world, a uniter of the world. So he came to this place, and he came and saw the knot. And it was something that you could not ordinarily disentangle. He took out his sword and cut through the knot. In other words, he completely came at it from a novel position that within the context of Greek culture, they never thought about. So it's a great story, and it makes the point about sometimes coming in from outside of a prevailing culture creates that disruption, a well-worn term, but can also then change history. Consider that there's a saying among the Austrians that they're very clever people because they convinced the world that Beethoven was Austrian and that Hitler was German. Hitler was an Austrian, he wasn't even German, and he spoke with an Austrian accent, and yet he came in from the outside and rallied the German people to that historical episode. Stalin was not Russian. Stalin was from Georgia, which was a separate national and ethnic group from the Russians themselves, as I think we now know. They are now an independent country, fully independent country, and yet he assumed the mantle of leadership over the entire Soviet Union. The list goes on. Napoleon was not French. He was a Corsican. Corsican was culturally Italian. Napoleon spoke Italian. He didn't speak French until after he was 12 years old. So again, he came in and became a French leader. So, it's interesting to me that you do have those figures of great historical leadership that come in from outside a culture and then take on that role. There are any number of other examples of this that you can come up with on your own. Arnold Schwarzenegger as governor of California, who would have thought? And other models of that as well. So something to think about, considering that leaders sometimes come in from the outside of a prevailing culture and enjoy not being bound by it, and thus can then take on a leadership role. This is the case, by the way, for very often organizations going outside of themselves to bring in a new CEO or a new leader from outside of its own ranks, from outside of its internal organizational operation. It is a way of breaking out of their old ways of thinking, should that be a consensus as to where to go. So that's it for today in terms of our little lecturette on leadership. Finish off that reading. Let's have a discussion about it. We'll try to schedule that during our kind of open discussion episodes that I'll be scheduling. Check the calendar for that. Okay, and if you have any questions, of course, let me know.